I'll just kick it off here a little bit. Guys, thank you so much. The turnouts for this, and I know I said this to you last week, it's been unbelievable. We're really proud of you guys for that. Today is going to be awesome. It's going to be a great discussion. The pleasure of working with these three for a couple months now. I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves because it kind of goes right in hand with what they're going to talk about. If you have questions, again, you're muted so that we can allow the speakers time to talk and then open up for discussion. If you have questions, it's all going to go through the chat, and then the host will unmute you in order for the discussion to take place. So anything you need to put in the chat, any questions you might have, feel free to throw that in the chat, and then we'll unmute you, or we can just go right to your question depending on what the question is. So again, thank you guys so much. I'm not going to take any more time, and enjoy.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here with all of you today. Just want to thank Joya and the team for inviting us to speak with you today. I'm going to kick it off to my colleague, Dr. Palmiter, to introduce herself first. So,
sorry, I was talking to myself, which I do often. So Leah Richards-Palmiter, Marywood for 20 years. I'm a social worker. I've been doing equity and inclusion work and working with student clubs. Have done some work with your institution in the past and have really enjoyed our relationship. So I'm the OG of the three of us. So I'll stop talking and pass it on.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leon John, Director of Alumni Engagement at East Stroudsburg University. I do live in the Northeast PA region. I live in Luzerne County, so I'm very familiar with your institution. I'm also not originally from the area. I was actually born in New York. My parents are immigrants. They're from the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago. So I was born in New York, but I still grew up in Trinidad and Tobago. So moved here after I was finished with high school. So I really had the opportunity to experience two cultures, two completely different ways of living, had a wealth of experiences, and my research focuses on students of color and their self-efficacy at institutions like Lackawanna. So really looking forward to this conversation, discussion, and questions that you may have.
And my name is Yerodin Lucas. I am the interim Director of Equity and Inclusion, and I'm also the Title IX coordinator at Marywood University. I'm originally from Philadelphia. I moved up to Scranton about five years ago now, and my interest in my research in terms of my doctoral work focused on first-year African-American male students at predominantly white institutions, and specifically in Northeast PA. So I looked at support structures for Black males in their first year in terms of social support, individual support, and academic support. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to that slide.
Yeah, just pop them all up. Yeah. So why we're here today, and we've heard from your team that you've had speakers in, and hopefully, you know, that now you want to like engage in a conversation. And that really is our goal, is to engage in a conversation and to talk about, you know, the types of questions and interests that you may have around diversity, inclusion, and equity. But why we are here today is that, so you heard that we are from other institutions, but Lackawanna College is in the enviable position of having, you know, student athletes of color of more than 42%. Marywood doesn't have that. East Stroudsburg doesn't have that. And so upon us hearing that, we thought, oh, we should join with them because we feel that we can just create sort of this regional sort of outreach and understanding and education around how, you know, so student athletes, how they work and how we can get them all to be as successful as possible. And very definitely the student athletes of color. So that's one of the reasons we're here today. You're going to hear us talk about some of the historical and current challenges of students of color in higher ed. So, you know, just sort of a quick overview. higher ed began allowing students of color in sort of after the creation of historically Black colleges and universities. So students of color were not allowed in higher ed in the white institutions, so people of color created their own. Then sort of a change in our culture, in our society, and sort of the term of inclusion became more popular. And so then institutions of higher ed, you know, as they are now, are welcoming all types of students and including students of color. So there has been a shift, though part of what we want to talk about and give you more information about today is that, so when you have students of color and student athletes of color on your campuses, that there are certain supports and there are certain resources that help that particular population of students to succeed. And when we talk about students of color, we also mean other students who are like marginalized, but we're going to focus on students of color. So as I said, we have been working with Lackawanna College to talk about sort of equity and inclusion efforts, so campus-wide. So as Joya said, we have been talking, I mean, we started talking the Friday before all the campuses were closed because of COVID. Literally, it was that Friday, and the following Monday, you know, the governor said shut down, and everyone started their COVID process. So this has been going on for several months. And in response, Lackawanna College has responded like mightily to, you know, understanding and making some tweaks and, you know, paying attention to what they do for equity and inclusion. And we're just here because we are people of, we are professionals of color in the region. And so we want to join with others in the region who have this desire to, you know, open up these lines of communication and have this dialogue. So that's why the three of us are here, and we'll be continuing to do our work, and sometimes behind the scenes with Joya and Dan and Eric. So that's third point. Fourth point, so, and you're going to hear from the two men, I mean, about their research, but also, you know, and we're going to emphasize and talk with you and encourage you to use the resources that are already available at Lackawanna College. So academically, socially, and individually, like what you can do to get the best out of, you know, yourself as an athlete, but also yourself as a student. And there are certain sort of practices and behaviors that we want to try to emphasize that will help you, you know, towards this excellence that all of us know that you are striving for yourself. And lastly, we just want to talk with, you know, the students of color and other marginalized students, that part of this relationship and this dance is understanding that you have a voice. So, and all of us are here to encourage you to use your voice. So having this self-advocacy of you know, engaging in this dance that, you know, is moving you towards excellence. So I think I did that in a record time. And usually I talk and talk and talk, and they pull me out. So yay, and we'll just keep on this track, because honestly, as Yerodin is setting up, we really want to hear from you all. So that's our goal.
All right, thank you, Leah. So we want to do a little activity with you all, just a real short, brief activity. And in front of you, you should see a diversity wheel with a series of concentric circles. In the middle, you have personality. Then if you go up, straight up from there, you have internal dimensions, external dimensions, and then organizational dimensions. I want you to take a moment, look around the wheel, and look at these different dimensions of diversity. And I just want you to think about which ones sort of bubble up for you, which ones resonate with you as something when you think about your interactions with, you know, your teammates, when you think about your interactions on campus, with your family, with your friend groups. Like, what are some of these dimensions of diversity that impact your interactions with those people and those groups in your life? For, you know, I know that one sort of bubbled up for me, which was a surprise. It bubbled up, this particular one bubbled up for me, but in any event, just take a moment, I'll be quiet for a few seconds, think about 2 or 3 of these that just sort of resonate with you, and think about what this particular dimension and how it impacts your interactions or your relationship with the people that are in your life. All right, so I know we have about 113 people on this call, so hopefully we can at least get 2 or 3 of you to speak up and speak out about which 1 or 2 sort of resonated with you and how it impacts your interactions or relationships, and tell us a little bit about that.
Don't forget to unmute yourself when you speak too.
So I think I need to, just gonna unmute everybody.
Nope.
Or claim
Okay, so I just gave everyone the option to unmute themselves because it's a little bit difficult for me to see who actually wants to speak. So I would invite 2 or 3 of you just to unmute yourself and talk a little bit about which dimension of diversity resonated with you.
Well, if no one else will speak up, I'll join the call.
Thank you.
So for the diversity wheel, probably gender and sexual orientation are my main ones because I am trans and I am bi. That's just my life. I also have the mental and physical capabilities because I struggle with like ADHD and depression and that whole fun cocktail of problems that really affect your life.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
1 or 2 more?
I'll speak up from a staff perspective here to kind of break the ice. I know our students aren't shy, so I like to see and hear from a few more of you guys. It's the whole reason I came on the call today because I'm missing our students. This is Dr. Lamagna here. Everyone knows me as our former dean of students, and I oversee student engagement. And just want all our students to know, Joy and I started on this endeavor when we saw a lot of these social injustices going on in the world, and knowing how much we care and love our students, we right away were reaching out to our vice presidents and presidents saying, what could we do? What could we do to do better at Lackawanna College? So when I look at this diversity wheel, I just think of those social injustices, the nationality and ethnicity piece, whether it's sexual orientation, and then, just being in higher education, wanting to support our students to have the best educational background and income opportunities to provide for themselves really means a lot. So hope to hear from more of our students throughout this presentation, and just want everyone on the call to know we are working hard during this pandemic while we're all virtual for our students to return. And whether you're here on campus or virtually, we're doing a lot for you here at Lackawanna. So hope that helps.
Thank you, Dan. And I just want to repeat the question. There was a question in the chat that they couldn't hear me. So when you look around the diversity wheel, you're going to choose like 2 or 3 or even 1 dimension that's on here that sort of resonates with you. And how do you feel it impacts the relationships that you have or the interactions that you have with your family, your friends, maybe your classmates, your teammates? And, how do you think that impacts based on that dimension of diversity?
I feel like with appearance, like nowadays, that's everything because looks are very deceiving with everything going on. So like I feel as though now like I have to dress like a certain way so I won't be discriminated against rather than me dressing culturally, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I hear you.
I also had something to say. I was gonna say sexual orientation is one for me. I am a female, but like my voice is very deep, and I do dress masculine, so it's a big thing for me when it comes to diversity. So that's a huge impact on me and how I'm viewed from society, my family, my friends, and people I'm surrounded by.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you.
All right. So in the interest of time, like I'm going to move on, but I want to invite you to sort of look at this wheel again. You can actually Google diversity wheel and you'll get this graphic. And I mean, this is something that, it touches us in a lot of different ways. And just sometimes we don't stop to think how these dimensions impact our relationships and our interactions with people. So I really want to thank those of you who shared. Thank you very much. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about implicit bias. And again, this is a term that I invite all of you to interrogate, to look up, to get a firm understanding for what implicit bias is. One of the things that Dr. John and Dr. Palmer and I talk about is that we feel like implicit bias is sort of the basis for everything when we talk about discrimination, when we talk about stereotypes, all of these things. And one of the things that we want you to know is that implicit bias, there's a lot of different terms for it, but here our working definitions are going to be attitudes and stereotypes that affect our actions, understanding, and decisions in an unconscious manner. And I think that word unconscious should be bolded because that's the key figure here, is that these are biases that are unconscious. These are things that are automatic. You don't even realize that you're thinking about them. We all have a story for pretty much every situation in life that we come across. And whatever our reactions are based on implicit biases from our childhood, from our upbringing, from our background. We download all kinds of stories from our family, from our friends, from social media, from the regular media. And these are the types of biases that form when we have these particular understandings, and then the reinforcement that we get over and over and over again. But the key thing here is to remember is that it's unconscious. Daily examples of implicit bias could be something that, if you think that men are more capable than women, that's an implicit bias. If you think that, one of the ones I like to use is food. Sometimes when you think about Italians, I know a lot of times people tend to think that all Italians love pasta. And I actually have some Italian friends who don't actually like pasta, but that's an implicit bias. And where did that come from? So then you want to talk a little bit about the difference between stereotypes and implicit bias. Stereotypes are explicit. Explicit is the opposite of implicit. If implicit is unconscious, then explicit is conscious. So these are the conscious types of feelings, types of actions that you are taking or you are making against a particular person, group of people, or any particular situation. And one of the things I like to say about stereotypes is that it's not that they're necessarily untrue, but it's that they are unfinished. Most stereotypes have some degree of some level of truth in them. They come from somewhere, but stereotypes over time have been morphed into these very negative. Sometimes they can be seen as positive. For example, if, there's this stereotype that folks in the Latinx community, their families are all tight-knit, everyone gets along. There's I guess it could be perceived as a positive stereotype that all Blacks know how to dance, which I can tell you I can dance. I don't know if you would qualify it as dancing well, but that's another story. But those are biases that are stereotypes that we can perceive as being positive. But then you also have stereotypes against, Hispanic communities that they're lazy, or black men are prone to violence, or they have low cognitive skills and things like that. Those are all stereotypes that are based in discrimination, racism, and all of those types of things. So the key thing to take away from this is that implicit is unconscious, explicit is conscious. And also know that you can be explicitly unbiased, but you can also be implicitly biased. So for example, you can say that I'm not a racist, but when you're met with certain situations, an implicit bias will kick in, and you might do something or say something based on your particular bias that you've learned over time that could be perceived as racist. So what you say and what you do can be two different things. So we talked about some characteristics of implicit bias. It's pervasive. It favors, mostly it favors our own in-groups. So when we think about the groups when we say in-groups, it could be athletes, it could be racial groups, it could be, different types of groups that we see as similar to us. And so we tend to favor those groups and have favorable biases or favorable opinions of those groups. One of the things to know is that implicit bias is malleable, meaning it can be changed. It can be unlearned. And, we could talk a little bit more about that later.
And just as you're changing slides, implicit bias is like this. Your eyes see, your brain processes, and then you have a response. So implicit bias is very quick, and that's why, as Dr. Lucas says, it's unconscious.
So let's speak a little bit about racism, equity, and inclusion. First of all, let's really dive into that term racism. Racism is when you express hate or bias towards an individual because of their race, through actions. It could be verbal or through thoughts. So right away, we go back to that implicit bias. Like Dr. Lucas indicated, you can be explicitly unbiased, but still have implicit bias. So you may just because you have a friend who's a different race than you, does not mean that you cannot be racist. Just because you're in class with someone who's a different race than you, does not mean that you cannot be racist or have racist thoughts. So anything that expresses hate or bias towards another individual solely based on their race, that is racism. We always think about racism as being overt, as being something that's violent, but it can also be something that you hold within yourself that you may not even know until you truly experience working with other people that's not part of your in-group. Let's talk about how universities and colleges, and I use that term PWI, which is defined as a predominantly white institution. So any institution that has over 50% students that are white. When you're a student, you're looking for an institution of higher education, you typically get this picture that it's a racially harmonic and integrated diverse community. Well, that's a false narrative. No matter which institution, if it's a predominantly white institution, it is a false narrative that they're building. Yes, it may be a diverse community, but is it welcoming to all people, to a diverse community? So we spoke about racism. What is diversity? Diversity is something that everyone has. You are diverse in your own way, whether it be your race, your gender, your socioeconomic status, where you're from, etc. That is diversity. So just because you may be the same color as someone else does not mean that you're the same. Typically, we tend to look at each other and lump each other into groups because of the way we look, but that is not always the case. So diversity is something that we all have. Equity is creating access so that everyone has the same experience. So we're all here today to speak about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the reason we're speaking about equity is so that we're creating access to the same resources that everybody has, to the same thoughts that that we want to get across to everyone, so that we create that access for everyone. And that inclusion, which is the action. So how are we going to display equity for everyone? Students of color, especially at predominantly white institutions, experience hostilities on a daily basis from their peers and from faculty, staff, and administration. And sometimes those hostilities are not overt. It could be things that are very minute, but at the same time, it can have an effect on the individual who's experiencing that student of color. Those are microaggressions. So think about it, right? You may have been in a situation as a student of color where you're sitting in a classroom and the professor points you out to ask you a question because you may be from Philadelphia, because you may be from New Jersey, because you may be from out of state. Automatically, that professor or faculty member automatically assumes that you know an experience based on where you're from, based on how you look, based on something else about you. That's a microaggression. Most microaggressions take place in the classroom, other academic areas and spaces on campus, residence housing, and anywhere that students socialize outside of the campus. Those tend to be the most unfriendly places that students say most microaggressions take place. Now, unfortunately, we cannot stop microaggressions from happening, but what we can do is what we're doing here today is educate everyone about that equity, about that inclusion. So in order for that those microaggressions to be stopped, or even for people to be aware of microaggressions, we need to do these trainings. We need to learn about diversity, equity, and inclusion. But we can't do any of that if we don't know what the definition of racism is, which again, not always violent, not always overt, but can be thoughts as well, like Dr. Lucas said, implicitly.
So I want to talk a little bit about my research. So the title of my dissertation was Factors Affecting African American Male Students at PWIs in Northeastern Pennsylvania. So I finished my studies last year. I graduated last year. And what my study looked at was first year Black males in higher education, specifically in Northeast PA. And the reason I chose Black males in particular was when I was doing research for my dissertation, I found out that Black male students across the country have the lowest persistence rates to achieving a first four-year degree of any student group in the country. So Black males were at the lowest rate of achieving a college education by way of a first four-year degree. And so that was the motivation for my study. Being a Black male myself, making it to a PhD program, you know, I often ask myself, how did I get here? And so that was the motivation for my study. And I know I'm speaking really fast, but I know we're short on time, so I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly. So I looked at support structures, academic, social, individual, and to see if those particular support systems were there for these students in their first year at the three institutions in Northeast PA that I studied. So we talked about things like need-specific resources like financial challenges, food insecurity, maintaining home networks. These are things that I found through my study, through interviewing the Black males and the students that I interviewed. These are things that they contend with. And these are things that also, you know, maintaining home networks, that's a positive thing. And I think, you know, those social connections are what, by and large, when I talk with my students, those social connections that they made on campus and off campus and the social connections maintained at home were some of the things that helped them to make it through when they were going through tough times academically and socially as well. So we talked about faculty and staff peer relations and how important that is, how important it is for faculty to see these males as individuals and not as some sort of monolith where every Black male has had the same type of experience. Leon talked about microaggressions, so I won't necessarily go into that. But one of the things my study also looked at was a lack of inclusivity. So a lot of my students said that they didn't really see themselves represented in their classes, in the curriculum that they were being taught, and you know, representations from faculty and staff of color on campus. These were things that they noticed and that really mattered to them and that were absent of the campuses that they're on. And so these were areas that I looked at helping the schools and finding out what some of the resources are so that I could help the students, but also help these institutions to support these students better.
Okay, we'll dive into my research really quick. And actually this speaks to all of you because what I did as well, much like Dr. Lucas, I took information from a survey that was administered in 2015 to students who are part of the, who attended predominantly white institutions of higher education in Northeastern Pennsylvania. So we took 3,000 student responses, students of color, and basically broke them out to see like what they were saying. What were some of the things that they needed in order to succeed at their institution of higher education. So one of the things that came up was their social identity theory. And that basically says that they wanted to be part of a group that they felt like they belonged to, right? So in your case, you're all athletes. So you're already part of that social group. Now within your group, there are other subgroups, such as you may have individuals who are students of color, you may have students who are white, you may have students who are from Philadelphia, you may have students from different areas, you may have students who are from Scranton, you may have students who are residents and students who are commuters, right? So within those bigger groups, there's subgroups. And what was happening was there were some different issues that each group was facing, even though all students of color were lumped in together, felt like they were lumped in together. They each had different issues. Some of the things that came up were campus climate, academic achievement, personal identity, and campus resources. I'll just go through each of those really quick. They felt like the campus climate was welcoming, but did not offer them a sense of community. They felt that their academic achievement was being challenged because it didn't feel comfortable in the classroom. They felt that their personal identity was being challenged because they feel like they didn't fit in. And the campus resources, or the resources that campuses had to offer, again, this was back in 2015, they felt was not enough that spoke to what they needed as students of color. So the takeaways from some of those students were that they wanted to see more recruitment and retention, accurate recruitment and retention of students of color, and for diverse faculty and staff. One of the issues that these students of color said that they faced was that when they looked around the campus, there weren't many people that looked like them who worked at the institution of higher education. Sure, they'd walk around campus, they'd sit in a classroom, there may be 2 or 3 or 4, maybe even 5 individuals who look like them, but the individual teaching in front of the classroom did not look like them. So right away, they didn't feel like they were part of that community. Financial aid also came up when they met with their financial aid counselors, or they visited financial aid office. They felt like they didn't feel like they were speaking to someone who understood what they were talking about, because they were not from, or they did not have the experiences that the students of color had. Some of these things are fixable, but of course it takes time. So that's why it's so important that when you get these surveys, or that when you have these trainings, or that when you're asked to speak up, please do, because administration is listening. We were asked to come here to speak to all of you about diversity, equity, and inclusion. The only way that's going to change is when you speak up, right? So make the campus, your voices can change your campus master plan. Your voices can help to recruit more diverse faculty, staff, and administration that look like you. Your voices can help with the recruitment and retention of more students who look like you, who are from areas that you may be from, and who can relate to you, so that you feel more welcomed in that community. Of course, none of this stuff happens overnight. It takes time, but your responses truly helps. And that's how I gauge my research.
So what we're going to do now is show a short video clip, and then we are going to have you break out into small groups and breakout rooms, and just talk about just a couple of questions that we have here. So I'm going to show the video, and then we'll break you out for about 5 minutes or so.
TripSpark's NovusMed software suite allows healthcare organizations, brokers, and providers to effectively manage all aspects of NEMT operations. NovusMed can be configured and customized to suit an organization's specific needs.
When I say the word student athlete, what comes to mind? Maybe it's the college football game you defaulted to so you could avoid another Geico commercial. Maybe it's the freshman that inspire and fill us with courage. And it's in this way that your voice is really one of the highlights of life. In part because wherever you go, your story goes with you. And the world is just waiting to hear the story. The world is waiting to hear from you. For anyone that's gone to school, engaging with the world around us and challenging perspectives is the very essence of our educational system. But how can we sit here and say that we endorse this model of growth and scholarship through learning if we're discouraging people from using their voice? When I say the word student athlete, what comes to mind? Maybe it's the college football game you defaulted to so you could avoid another Geico commercial. Maybe it's the freshman that swam away to an Olympic gold medal in between classes. Or maybe it's that kid at the dining hall with like 5 plates who's going back for seconds and thirds. I actually got to laugh at that one because anyone who actually knows me knows that last kid is definitely me. You see, as both student and athlete, I get this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to take the passion I've cultivated on the field into the classroom, into a place where professors teach us to challenge ourselves, a place where we learn to challenge each other, a place where we explore new ways of challenging the world around us. But the very challenge of living between the whistle and the school bell comes with so much more than shuffling into class after practice, or finding new ways to smuggle food into philosophy lectures, or actually, in my case, waking up at 5 a.m. to practice and just hoping you don't get a cold call during contract law. But it does come with this challenge of identity at times, of reconciling who you are and how your voice is going to be used with who the world expects you to be and the boxes that we often find ourselves put in. And maybe you agree with me. Maybe this is something that we all experience in terms of challenge, but it is important to note that these challenges don't show any prejudice towards age or whether you're a freshman or in graduate school. You see, I was only a sophomore when George Zimmerman murdered Trayvon Martin. And looking at the article briefly, my notions of justice and fair play didn't at all agree with what the courts had ruled or even how something like this could happen. But I mean, what was I going to do? I was just a student. And at that time, to be honest, going to law school was out of the question. It was expensive. And we all know lawyers talk entirely too much. But in looking at this child's face, I couldn't shake this uncanny resemblance he had to these everyday people in my life. You see, Trayvon was my little brother. Trayvon was my teammate that measured out my distances in long jump. Trayvon was even the kid in my English lecture that waved me down when there was nowhere else to sit. So naturally, I took to Twitter just to post a comment wishing that his life, his family, his legacy, like all of us, receives justice. And to be honest, this is no different than the way I feel about the law now, because regardless of what you look like, what you believe, or where you're from, we all deserve justice. And I believe that. Don't you? But what people said about what I had tweeted is actually why I'm here today. You see, people told me I should stick to running in circles. People told me that I should let regular individuals handle this. People even told me I should stick to playing in the sand. And at that very moment, as a student athlete, I had no voice. My voice went only about as far as I could jump or as far as my athletic ability. How devastating. But suddenly, this was about so much more than being a student athlete. This is about being a human being without a voice. And I'm wondering if this sounds like any of you. I mean, seriously, how different is this from raising your hand in class or writing an op-ed or kneeling at a football game? Is it any different than standing alongside those in support of the Women's March or standing behind our military during times of controversy? Why on earth are we so hard on people that step outside of this box and challenge perspectives? Why, for example, aren't we encouraging more student athletes to use their voice? And how did we get here? How did we get to this point in society where we're reducing people to these one-dimensional characteristics that don't even begin to do justice to their potential and their voice? Now, I gotta be honest, I might never find the answer to any of these questions, but a month after this happened, I certainly thought I did. You see, I found myself among scores of other travelers enjoying the warm hospitality of airport security. And I didn't think I looked too abnormal. I mean, had a cinnamon-colored suit on with a charcoal gray tie. It actually seemed to fit. And to be honest with you, none of that mattered because for the first time in like 3 months, I had managed to get all of the sand out of my socks, which is a huge accomplishment for people in my event. But even with all that being said, someone still managed to come up to me and ask me what team I played for. And how this person knew I was an athlete still escapes me to this day. But I tell him I'm a proud Lobo. He asks me what sport I play, what my event is, how far I jump. He wishes me well and we go our separate ways. But when I got to my plane, I'm overhearing another conversation between a passenger and a student that sounds strikingly identical to mine, except for the questions they're being asked. Questions like, what's your major? Why'd you choose the school you chose? And what are you gonna do after you graduate? And as I'm looking out of the window, I couldn't help but wonder why no one ever asked me these questions. And honestly, it brought me back to the tweet I had sent about Trayvon Martin a month prior. And a couple of the dots started to connect for me. You see, maybe the issue that society has with student athletes using their voice, or even just athletes using their voice, has nothing to do with our majors or where we go to school. Because maybe the real problem is that society doesn't believe that student athletes are really students at all. And this is something that's so amazing to me because, I mean, maybe they don't want to. Maybe because to them, we're just entertainment. I mean, we're the people that you turn to when Monday Night Football is over, or when the World Series ends, or if you didn't get tickets to the World Cup. I mean, of course, fans will come out to the games, they'll listen to the radio interviews, they'll even stream the top 10 plays of the season. But how many college sports fans that you know can honestly tell you anything about the academic pursuits of any of their favorite student athletes? It's a striking finding, really, because even looking statistically at a spectator sport like football, with over 74,000 student athletes, only 250 of them roughly are going to get drafted to the NFL. This means that over 73,000 of these kids are going to go pro in something other than their sport. They're going to contribute to society in ways that go far beyond what they were ever going to do athletically. And yet these same individuals are told that their voice only goes as far as they could throw a football. The very minute we step outside of this box that we've been put in, we're told we have to be quiet. And as I look at all of you, I can't help but wonder, how many of you guys have ever been there? How many of you guys have ever been told to keep your opinions and your perspectives to yourselves because it supposedly went outside your scope? A scope that may have been because of where you were from, what you looked like, or what you believed. You see, the very minute we believe this lie that our perspectives and our story is irrelevant, we stop using our voice altogether. But I'm wondering, if you stopped using your voice, whose story wouldn't get told? You see, anytime we muzzle groups and other people, we don't just miss out on these critical opportunities to learn, we miss out on perspectives, we miss out on these stories that inspire and fill us with courage. And it's in this way that your voice is really one of the highlights of life, in part because wherever you go, your story goes with you. And the world is just waiting to hear this story. The world is waiting to hear from you. For anyone that's gone to school, engaging with the world around us and challenging perspectives is the very essence of our educational system. But how can we sit here and say that we endorse this model of growth and scholarship through learning if we're discouraging people from using their voice? How can we actually say that? And for student athletes, this is something that's incredibly important to us because this is one of the very many ways that we learn. In fact, to this day, one of my favorite quotes out of my philosophy class came from Plato as he's talking about justice. And he actually goes on to say that in order for man to succeed in life, God gave us these two things, not to be used separately as one for the soul and one for the body, but to be used together. And that is through these means of education and physical activity that man can actually achieve perfection. Now, no one's perfect, but this idea of creating a union between athletics and academics is the very nature of being a student athlete, or even just staying physically active while you're in school. And
Okay. We're going to stop there and go back to the presentation. But before we do that, and I know that we talked about breaking you up into small groups, but in the interest of time, what we would like to do is just open it up to questions, to open it up to any comments or questions that you might have. And, if it's about the video, if it's about something that we talked about so far, but we want to give you time to make sure that we allow you to ask questions.
It could be your story, it could be your perspective, your relationships with, the people that are in athletics. I mean, we're just really interested in having this dialogue.
And I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen so I can see your faces, because I can't see anybody while I'm sharing.
And if you don't want to say it and unmute, you can put it in the chat and I will shout it out.
I just want to say, like, I can really relate to him because, like, now I'm thinking about it, no one ever asked me, like, what I was going to college for or what I was doing. It was always, oh, what do you play? It looked like you play ball or volleyball. Like, you tall, you got long legs, like, you look very athletic. It was really never about my education or what I wanted to do in life. So that really, like, it really was an eye opener. Like, people, I don't know if they mean to, but, like, based on my appearance, don't think that I'm more than an athlete.
Good point.
Thank you.
So we understand so our presentation, and we understand that you had another presentation, and you've had presentations. So, you know, and it could be, I mean, just sort of, we're interested in your understanding about your roles as student athletes. Those of you who are students of color, who are student athletes, sort of understanding sort of the social climate that we currently find ourselves in. And then, I mean, sort of all wrapped up in that is how can you be, you know, the most successful student at Lackawanna that can be.
And again,
Can you
you can
please
feel
repeat
free to
what you
put
just
your,
said?
Leah, repeat what you said.
Oh, no, I was saying, so what we would like to do is, you know, the rest of this time is have this dialogue in, you know, just sort of answering any questions about sort of the perspective. So looking at sort of where we are, you know, as a society, where we are as a culture, sort of unity and division, understanding. I mean, several people have spoken up about sort of the lens that they see their lives through, you know, sort of what their statuses are. And they, you know, I thought they were very brave in opening up that, and sometimes that can be a more difficult road. And I mean, part of our wanting to have this discussion was with, I mean, we talked to Dan and Joya about sort of the relationships that they were having with you all, right? And the mentoring and encouraging that happens, you know, as you all are student athletes in at Lackawanna. So what other questions do you have around, or what comments do you have around, you know, sort of maybe your experiences?
I want to hop in again, kind of break that ice maybe, and just encourage our students, you know, definitely speak up. Feel free to speak to past experiences at Lackawanna College, or new students that maybe have some anxieties, you know, coming to Lackawanna for the first time. Don't anyone feel like they're going to get in trouble, or, you know, I mean, this is an open format. We really encourage you speaking up, as we want you to have the best experience when you're here. So, yeah, hope that helps our students. Feel free to speak up.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yep. To create that inclusive environment, we need your feedback.
I have a brief story. So I'm a mother. All my kids are in college. So one in law school, one just graduated from college, and the second one, and he's going to go again, and the other one's a sophomore. So in raising my children in Northeastern PA, my son an athlete, and basketball and baseball. Those are his two sports that he really excelled in. And though, I mean, he found a lot of times that some of his peers, and mind you, in the school that we went to, we were the only people, my kids were the only people of color in their classes. They were the only representation, and it's local in Lackawanna County. And my son, a lot of the times, some of the kids would use the N-word with him because they thought it was a way to connect with him, right? And so, but for him, being called the N-word was not a way to connect with. And then having to, you know, sort of do that education. And to be honest, that helped me sort of become the educator that I am, to help others around. I mean, there's ways of connecting, but then there's, I mean, the N-word for me, like, should never be used. But sort of that happened. But then finding him, you know, sort of like mentors, and then other ways, you know, to sort of deal with that. So that's just a brief little story of my kids' experience here.
If I may, I'd like to reflect back on our conversation last week with Mr. Ricky Cephas. And he was talking regarding the importance of registering to vote and voting and letting your voice be heard. And we had several questions come up from that. And I'd be curious to know, you know, you as the panel, how do you feel about this upcoming election? And we're not looking, you know, obviously for political views, but the importance of voting for our student athletes and how their voices can be heard in order to make change that we're looking for or that is needed?
Well, I think for me, I'll interject to say that, you know, I'm an advocate of voting, you know, no matter what, you know, what party you vote for, but the idea and the action of actually voting, you know, especially particularly in this country, you know, has had a very tumultuous time. I mean, in terms of people who were not able to vote in the, you know, in the past, and specifically people of color. But I just think no matter what, you know, no matter what race you are, no matter what you are a citizen, if you are able to vote, you should cast your vote. I think, you know, we're talking about legislation, we're talking about things that you may not fully understand that will or, you know, might or definitely impact you over the next 4 years, and even maybe the next 8 years, depending on, you know, if this whoever wins becomes president for 2 terms. So, you know, even if you're taking a look at the issues that only pertain to you, do that and vote. So
I would definitely echo that. You know, voting is one thing that we all have the right to do. So we have that right. It doesn't matter about our race, doesn't matter about our gender, doesn't matter how rich we are, how poor we are, where we live, we can all vote. So that's a right that not many people can say that they have in other countries of the world. So use your voice and vote. It's one of the most important things that you can do. And like Dr. Lucas said, vote for your beliefs. It doesn't matter, you know, which candidate you believe in or what that candidate speaks to you about, but just use your voice, use your vote to vote for that. So that's the one way you can have your voice be heard.
I echo that sentiment. I mean, sort of sit with, I go a little step further, sit with understanding, sort of taking in everything we've been talking about, taking in sort of who you are, right? So who you are, and then look at the candidates to see who resonates with that, right? So who you are, then finding a voice and voting, because it is such a privilege. And one that all of you should take advantage of. Finding and using your voice. And this is one step in sort of, you know, what college and an athlete is all about, sort of engaging with the bigger world, right? So you taking a stand on the things that are important to you and that represent you. So we strongly encourage you to vote.
And also, just to add a last point, you may not be able to think about how things are right now, but think about how you might want things to be in 4 years from now. And think about which candidate or candidates, because you have a president and vice president running as well. So think about which candidates you think would lead us there in 4 years.
Right, your vision. And where you'll be in 4 years. So thanks, Eric. That was a great segue.
Thank you for your responses too.
Someone says, I haven't felt the desire to vote until this year because I feel as if the lives of us people of color lives and the way we were able to live depends on it. With all that has happened this year, it is a form of self-respect as a person of color to vote. Amen.
Thank you. So being an incoming freshman,
Moving away.
Moving away, how do you feel is the easiest way to cope? Leon, you want to take that one maybe?
Sure. So like I said, at 17 years old, I uprooted my entire life and moved from one country to the next. And it was a complete culture shock as I moved from Trinidad and Tobago to Scranton, Pennsylvania. So it was really a big culture shock. It is very hard to cope. When I moved, we didn't have social media, so I couldn't really stay in touch with my friends and family the way that we can now. But what I can tell you is, first of all, get involved as much as you can on campus, because then that helps you to learn what the community is about. You all are athletes, so you're already doing that. But there are other campus clubs and organizations that you could probably be part of. And then also speak to someone. So speak to your coaches, speak to your student life staff. Find a faculty member. If you have an advisor, speak to them. Let them know that you're having this difficult time coping. Moving from one area to the next can be traumatizing, especially if you move to an area where you look around and there are things that are not familiar and people are not familiar. and people don't look the way that you do. And you're looking for that, and you're looking for culture, and you're looking for so much more. So try to speak about that with someone. If you can't find someone, you'll get our contact information. Contact us. We will point you in the right direction, because really it is tough to be able to adapt in such a short period of time.
I just feel like it's kind of hard with all the COVID stuff.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
I feel like it's just kind of hard, like, because like I'm an incoming freshman and like joining clubs and all that. I feel like it's just kind of hard, like, because all the COVID stuff, like I won't even go to campus until spring semester. So like I just feel like it's hard, like, to do all that.
And you're right about that. I mean, that's a really good point. It is hard. It's hard without COVID, especially as an incoming first year student. But to add COVID, another layer to that, you're exactly right about that. I know that there's a lot of things going on virtually with student groups and different things like that, and that's not the same as being face to face, but it's still a connection. It's still networking. It's still building a relationship. And so I would, seek some of those out and talk to your professors and staff members and see if there's anything that you might not know about that's going on in the community. And there are, the governor just made some updates to different, in terms of folks being able to be in spaces a little bit more people. And so there will be things opening up, and, just I find out as much as you can and ask people, because, we are sometimes our best allies and best advocates. So I would invite you to do that.
And in the chat was a shout out to sort of your student wellness. So, and they oftentimes have access to like groups and other activities and events that are going on for students that, that you may not know about. So reach out to them as well.
And lastly, I just put our contact information up here, so hopefully you can all see it. Feel free to reach out to either one of us or all of us. And I know we're up on 3 o'clock, and I know we had a 3 o'clock time to stop. So I want to be cognizant of your time, and thank you all. I really thank those of you who unmuted yourselves and shared, and for those of you who listened. I hope that some of the things your peers said resonated with you. I hope some of the things that we said resonated with you, and it was great to spend this time with you.
Absolutely. Shoya, Eric, is there anything?
I would just, before we close, if I can, I see a lot of freshmen on this call, which means they haven't even had an opportunity to get here. So they're really unsure of the culture. They're really unsure of the college community. But I'm just going to nudge a few of our returners. I see like Keenan, I see Jayla, I see Deja, just a few of you. I would just ask if you can honestly answer this question for me and Dean, Dr. Lamagna. What is, if you can narrow this down, it's obviously broad, but what would you say? Like, can you just shout out some of the struggles you have that maybe I'm unaware of as your coach or as the director of athletics, or maybe that Dr. Lamagna is unaware of as, running the student life side? If you guys just don't mind, you guys are definitely returners, us, but it could help us get a better understanding. Sorry to call you out, but I just think that's one thing that we needed to get out of this. So if you could just anything, I mean, I'm here to be like, I'm not afraid. If you need to smack me in the face, that's okay.
I would say, since I got called out, that it's okay that things are different at first. Like when I first got there, I had to find comfort in doing new things. So I wasn't automatically just going into school like, oh, I'm so excited. Like I was nervous. I just got taken out of position really fast, and it just hits you when everyone leaves. But it's okay to find your own comfort in being away, and sooner or later it gets easier as time goes on. But as soon as you find a group of people, it's not that bad. So if I suggest something, find a nice group of people that you're interested in and keep that group going and try to expand as much as you can.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I can only speak personally from an athlete level, because I know that living on campus and being in college is different when you're an athlete and just a regular student that's just there for school. It's easier to find your way with people as an athlete, because of course you're surrounded by your teammates and everything. So I would just say basically the same thing he said with finding your group, because college isn't easy to get through alone. And even if your group isn't students, you can always use your resources. Like that's one thing that Coach drills in our head all the time, is to use our resources. So just find your people, not even just a specific group, your person, your people that you feel as though you're comfortable with going to in school to help you through whatever challenges you feel like you're about to overcome, because that does help through it all.
I could agree with that, because when I first came to like Lackawanna, I was like not comfortable with people or like big crowds. So it was like when I like was in my team and we started bonding, I felt like, oh, they're like the same as me. So it made me feel comfortable. It made me want to get up, go to practice, do what I gotta do. And I just agree with that, because people that are like you can really make you feel better about what you're doing.
I mean, I'm a freshman, but like I can agree to that too, because when I first got there, I barely was like communicating with my teammates. Or anybody there. So I had to get like used to it and stuff, and the environment. But everything different due to COVID. Like everything there is totally different than what I expected.
I'm a freshman, but I would like to say that my upperclassmen teammates, like I was real lost with the Canvas app and just getting around, and my teammates made it like real easier, and it kind of like it helped me make me feel like I was at home. So yeah, click with your upperclassmen or click with your teammates, because they help you in like big ways.
Well, those are great gems that you all are offering. That's exactly, I mean, Joya, that was the best question of the day. And making these relationships. It's about relationships and creating those that you already have with your coaches, and then with these upperclassmen and other freshmen.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for those answers. And please just feel free. We really are on a quest to do everything we can to better this campus, be diverse, be inclusive, and have the resources that you guys need. Dr. Lamani and I are leading that group. So you guys, especially, you know, us being athletes and us being athletes, you have our ear, and we have that relatability to have that relationship to hopefully pass it up as high as we can to the presidential level to make the changes that need to happen on this campus. And I just appreciate everyone for those of you that spoke up. I really appreciate it. I just would hope that those of you that didn't, you got something out of this, and you have some contact numbers now. It goes back to what Deja just said about resources. You have some resources, and that's what this is all about. So just thank you to our presenters. If you guys can just, give them a little shout out in the chat, thank them for their time. Thank you, athletes, for your time. And we hope you have a good long weekend. Take care of yourselves, take care of your bodies, and we'll see you back on Tuesday.
And on the way out, before everybody leaves, and we've said this a million times, please check your Falcons email. We want to get this information to you. We're gonna all the contact information that was provided to you today, we will get it to you. So feel free to follow up with questions later. Okay. Everybody have a great weekend, and we appreciate everybody here. That was phenomenal information today, and we're all still learning. Let's keep it going.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Takers, guys.